Thank you. We move on to our next session. For the next session, chairperson is Dr. P. Mohan, who is a clinical cardiologist at Coimbatore and vice president to Indian Association of Clinical Cardiologists. Dr. Jaishankar, clinical cardiologist at Ranchi. Dr. Pankaj Kumar, clinical cardiologist at Jamshedpur. Vipula Verma, who is consultant obstetrician and gynecologist at Nath Hospital and Santivita Hospital, Ranchi. The topic for the presentation is heart diseases in women, and it will be presented by Dr. Mohammad Shafiq. I request Dr. P. Mohan to kindly introduce Dr. Mohammad Shafiq. Dr. P. Mohan, please. May I request Dr. Vipula Madam to kindly introduce our speaker, Dr. Mohammad Shafiq. I request Dr. Vipula Madam to kindly introduce Dr. Shafiq. Madam is on mute mode. She needs to unmute herself.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah. Thank you. First of all, at the outset, I would like to thank organizers for inviting me to chair the session. The talk will be on heart disease in women. Will be presented by Dr. Mohammad Shafiq K. He is from Aster Medicity, Cochin. He is founder, honorary general secretary, IACC, and also national president, IACC 2020 to 2021. I invite Dr. Mohammad Shafiq to kindly start his presentation.
Over to Dr. Shafiq.
Thank you, madam, and thank you, Dr. Vineet. I'd like to congratulate Dr. Vineet on this occasion because this is the first webinar or national web conclave which is being conducted by IACC. And am I audible?
Yes, Dr. Shafiq. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, so my talk is about heart disease in women. As everywhere, like representation of women in studies and research work are less, and this topic has been taken from Braunwald's textbook. I'll just go through the problems that we face when we are dealing with women with cardiac diseases. So comparatively, CVD is the leading cause of death in women worldwide. Since 1984, the annual mortality rate for CVD has been higher for women than men, yet CVD remains understudied, underdiagnosed, and undertreated in women. And the reason for this underrepresentation is physician awareness is suboptimal. These are like evaluations done in 2006, and trials did not include women till 1991. There was only men, the subjects were only men. And when compared to men, women are more likely to present with atypical symptoms. So naturally, we won't take them seriously. And women have more comorbidities and are less likely to be referred for cardiac testing, including CAG. And in a patient with non-ST elevation ACS, women differ from men in that women are more likely to have abnormal BNP and high sensitivity CRP levels and less likely to have an elevated troponin. And now let's come to the risk factors. Like as usual, age is the first one. Age is a powerful risk factor in predicting CAD, and cardiac events in women occur 10 years later than in men. For example, if you take a man with 35 years, for the same intensity of disease, it will occur in a woman only at 45 years. That 10 years difference is there. And the incidence of coronary artery diseases in women older than 65 years, 1 in 3 has a cardiac disease. And in the age group 45 to 64, it is 1 in 8. So that intensity increases after the age of 65 as per studies. And the NCEP ATP3, that is National Conclave Cholesterol Evaluation Program Adult Treatment Panel 3. Age 55 is a risk factor for women. When we are considering the the scores, age more than 55 should be considered as a risk factor for women. And for men, the age is 45. Mortality from acute MI is twice for women. And in the middle age group, that is mostly in the middle age group means 45 to 64. And this difference is not seen in old age. Now let's come to the relevance of family history. According to this same NCEP ATP3 and AHA definition, a first degree relative with coronary artery disease before 65 years of age for women and 55 years of age for men. That is the relevance of, you should consider as a young CAD. Premature CAD in a first degree female relative is more potent family history risk factor than in a male relative. So this specifically needs to be asked. And subclinical coronary artery disease by calcium score has been proved in women with normal Framingham score, but has a sister with premature CAD. So that much importance is there if a female in the family has history of CAD. Coming to hypertension, prevalence of hypertension is more common in women compared to men, but only in the age group above 65 years. And compared to men, BP control is poor in women population, and it has been shown by the Women's Health Observational Study. Hypertension is associated with the risk to develop congestive heart failure, and women are more prone to be affected with this. So that reflects the need for control of hypertension in women. Then there is a greater life expectancy. So as they live longer, there is more incidence of stroke, which can be controlled by proper control of hypertension. Coming to the relevance of diabetes as a risk factor in women, diabetes increases the women's risk for coronary artery disease 3 to 7 times. And this increase in diabetic men compared with non-diabetic men is only 2 to 3-fold. And the risk of fatal CAD in a diabetic woman is 3.5 times than in a non-diabetic woman. And it is higher than in diabetic men, because in diabetic men, this same ratio is only 2 times. The American Diabetes Association suggests consideration of diabetes screening for women and men over the age of 45 years, and then every 3 years, if the first results are normal. For women with a history of gestational diabetes, screening for diabetes should occur 6 to 12 weeks postpartum, and then every 1 to 2 years. Smoking, although it is relatively less in Indian women, it can be more detrimental in women than in men. Female smokers die 14.5 years earlier than female non-smokers. In males, this number of years comes down to 13.2. Cessation of smoking substantially reduces the risk in women, but for the status to come to normal, it takes around 10 years. Another factor is the use of oral contraceptives. Or once oral contraceptives and smoking is combined, then it imparts an even greater risk for MI. Maybe it is thought to be related to the prothrombotic effects of smoking and oral contraceptives. And compared to the prior generation of contraceptives. The third generation is the safest, even more than the fourth generation, and the older ones. Third generation oral and contraceptives have been found to be safer. Now, comparing the number of cigarettes, 25 or more cigarettes a day. This is in Americans, okay? 25 or more cigarettes a day increases the women's risk by 12-fold. But smoking 25 plus taking an oral contraception increases it by 32-fold. So it's almost 3 times. Coming to physical activity. In the Women Take Heart project, asymptomatic women who did not achieve 5 METs on Bruce protocol had a 3-fold increased risk of death compared with women who achieved more than 8 METs. So capacity to exercise itself, we can classify their risk category. Risk of death among women whose exercise capacity was less than 85% of the predicted value for age was at least twice that of women who could exercise more than 85% of the age predicted value. In the effectiveness-based guidelines for prevention of CVD in women, it's a 2011 update, physical inactivity or poor physical fitness is a criterion for placing a woman in the at-risk group. And we have the emerging risk factors which are yet under research and studies. Mainly, as we all know, metabolic syndrome and obesity. Then air pollution. Air pollution has different implications in women. Like, for example, all of us now are sitting here at home, and the smell from the kitchen of the cooking lunch is there in the atmosphere. But what we don't think about is the women who are cooking are exposed to this stringent fumes from different kinds of oils and masalas, everything. That is in effect acting as a pollutant, air pollutant, and they're breathing it. It may affect their lungs and heart. And this is not yet clinically or proved by research, but studies are focusing on that. That is why I just put that emerging risk factor there. Then HSCRP, autoimmune diseases, POCD, as we all know, functional hypothalamic amenorrhea, eclampsia, preeclampsia, and pregnancy-induced hypertension, gestational diabetes, breast cancer therapy. We are seeing patients undergoing breast cancer therapy with PAD and heart failure, reproductive hormone, oral contraceptive therapy, then postmenopausal hormone therapy. Hormone therapy is nowadays discontinued because it's just not been found useful, but still due to other effects of deficiency, some people have to take that, and so that has been mentioned as the emerging risk factor. Now, how to diagnose ischemic heart disease in women? The classification of IHD risk in women refers solely to women who present for evaluation of suspected CAD, who has chest discomfort of some ischemic equivalent, including excessive dyspnea. Broadly characterized, premenopausal women with symptoms should be considered at low risk only. Then symptomatic women in the 5th decade of life should be considered at low to intermediate ischemic heart disease risk if they are capable of performing routine activities of daily living, which is short form ADL. If performance of routine ADL is compromised, a woman in her 50s should be elevated to the intermediate risk category, and women in their 60s are generally considered as intermediate risk. Women above 70 years of age are considered at high risk for CAD. Now, diagnosis for CAD based on the 2014 consensus statement for non-invasive testing and the clinical evaluation of women with suspected ischemic heart disease. Women at low IHD risk are not candidates for a diagnostic evaluation. In the exceptional case, a routine TMT or exercise electrocardiogram is the recommended test. The woman with a low intermediate or intermediate risk is a candidate for an exercise ECG if she has functional capacity estimate of 5 METs or higher. Women at intermediate high ISD risk with an abnormal 12-lead resting ECG should be referred for CAD non-invasive imaging, including pharmacology, stress myocardial perfusion imaging, echocardiography, or CT coronary angiogram. Women with high ISD risk with stable symptoms may be referred for a stress imaging modality for functional assessment of the ischemic burden and guidance of post-test anti-ischemic therapies. So far, we are non-invasive. And about the treatment, a persistent pattern of higher mortality rate and poorer cardiovascular outcomes in women compared with men with ISD, it remains. This is most attributable to the suboptimal use of guideline therapy in women. Women with ACS are more likely than men to have a normal angiogram or demonstrate no obstructive CAD. This is called the female pattern. ISD in women is characterized by a relatively lower obstructive CAD burden and preserved LV function. And this represents the Yentl syndrome, whereby women receive less recognition and treatment than men with ISD. So we come to the female aspect of CAD, the microvascular coronary dysfunction with no obstructive CAD. It appears to be more prevalent in women than in men, possibly because of risk factor clustering and hormonal alteration. And likely it contributes to the observed paradoxical, frequent, atypical symptoms, evidence of ischemia, and adverse outcomes in women. Coming to heart failure, the heart failure in women is mainly, the stress cardiomyopathy and peripartum cardiomyopathy. So we can attribute it to the highly emotional status and pregnancy, which is more prevalent in women. Treatment for heart failure may benefit both sexes equally. However, the underrepresentation of women in heart failure trials and the fact that preserved ejection fraction heart failure with preserved ejection fraction is more prevalent in women. This contributes to our lack of evidence regarding treatment of heart failure in women. At this time, the heart failure guidelines are not sex specific. Sex, gender, and genetics, definition of sex is like the biological organs and chromosomal contribution to the bodily functions. So there is it has been found that the biological sexual difference contributes to the difference in ischemic heart disease also. Gender has been defined as the behavioral pattern that an individual adopts to the society, and it is not related to, or it doesn't depend on the biological sexual characteristics. So these two aspects actually has implications on the ischemic heart disease outcome. So presently, the heart failure guidelines are not sex specific because of sex specific pathophysiological mechanisms are not well understood, and there is lack of randomized trials to prove this. Now we have the preventive guidelines for CVD prevention in women. It's largely based on the effectiveness-based guidelines for the prevention of cardiovascular disease in women, 2011 update, but have been replaced by the 2013 ACC/AHA evidence-based guidelines on the treatment of blood cholesterol to reduce ASCVD in adults. These guidelines apply to both women and men and lack sex-specific recommendations. Cardiac rehabilitation improves functional capacity. It decreases anginal symptoms. It facilitates CVD risk reduction and improves psychosocial well-being in both sexes. It also improves the quality of life and medication compliance and reduces rates of morbidity and mortality. Actually, both sexes, male and female, should be referred for cardiac rehabilitation after experiencing angina or any type of MI, or who undergoes any coronary revascularization, either CABG or PCI, or valvular heart surgery, or they are receiving any diagnosis of chronic heart failure and is under treatment for that. Actually, cardiac rehabilitation is remarkably underused nowadays. I think in foreign countries, usually they have like every patient must follow up in a cardiac rehabilitation center. But in India, it is yet to develop, and even like cardiologist referral to a cardiac rehabilitation center is very low. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation, and thank you.
Dr. Shafiq, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Dr. Shafiq, thanks for the good slides and the concise and scripts speech as usual. I have to make out one point. In the smoking in the woman, most of our say there is no smoking, but we have to take a history of tobacco chewing. That is very important, because most of the time, whatever the woman we see, most of them from their childhood age used to chew tobaccos. That also one of the contributing factor. I have seen some patients with tobacco chewing with induced hypertension and heart failure and IHD also. So what is your opinion regarding this?
Yeah, tobacco definitely it is a contributing factor in ischemic heart disease. And moreover, when you ask for when you consider smoking in women, nowadays everyone has a gas stove. Before that, they used to smoke in the kitchen. That smoke from wooden, burning wood.
Yeah.
It also has the same effect. But nowadays it has decreased because almost all homes are equipped with a gas stove. This exposure is usually in the higher social class. Women are not usually into cooking. They appoint maids, and the lower class always is exposed. So they are the most who comes under this effect. But as you said, tobacco definitely is a factor, and when we take history, we may ask for smoking and the betel chewing, which is like usually that is when they take tobacco, and then using that shiny kind of products which they keep inside the mouth. That is nicotine does have an effect on this endovascular health.
Yes. And there are certain questions for you. What is the prognosis of peripartum cardiomyopathy?
Peripartum cardiomyopathy actually has an excellent prognosis if it is treated well in time, because it takes the main important factor is identifying it is peripartum cardiomyopathy. Whenever a pregnant woman approaching the delivery time and postpartum, if there is dyspneic episodes or such symptoms suggestive of cardiac failure, like pedal edema, dyspnea, diagnosing the heart failure and decongestive measures and supportive inotropic supports to maintain adequate BP, and let that woman go tide over through that phase, then naturally the cardiac function comes back to normal. Within some people it takes 1 month up to 6 months it takes. So it has excellent prognosis, but the clinician or the gynecologist who is following up should have a high degree of suspicion of this diagnosis to get this diagnosis.
Thank you. Here in Tamil Nadu now, what they mandatory do is all the antenatal they screen during the 3rd semester with echo. Now it is compulsory and mandatory, but I don't know about the other states. We need any idea?
That's a good approach actually.
Because any pregnant woman after 2nd semester now we are screening everybody, even in GH or whatever it may be. Yeah. So now it is mandatory in Tamil Nadu government. Yeah. So maybe we can ask your gynecologist also do the same, so we can avoid certain complications. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, this can be given as a request from our side also to the
Yes, yeah,
government. Like
definitely. Yeah.
that's the thing. Yeah.
Comment from Vipula madam. Madam, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Shafiq, for such a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, ma'am.
I would like to ask one question regarding one important aspect in women, that is in pregnancy. What is your take-home message for pregnant women? Means because of the hemodynamic changes, many of the features which are common in heart disease, they simulate in normal pregnancy also. So how to differentiate what are the warning signs and symptoms from where we should get alert and we should refer to a cardiologist for further evaluation, or routinely we evaluate each and every patient? What is your view, sir?
Actually, when a woman is planning for pregnancy, before entering that pregnancy phase, she should get evaluated for cardiac illness, because first of all, hypertension and drugs which can be used for hypertension during pregnancy is entirely different. We should be taking care about the fetus also. So there are certain drugs like ACE inhibitors which are contraindicated, and once if we do not evaluate a woman prior to the pregnant period, suppose she gets into ACS during pregnancy, then things get worse. And also, like regarding valvular heart disease, which are very uncommon nowadays, but still we have to have a look at the valves and whether she's fit for pregnancy. And then naturally, so an echo and probably TMT is not that required if the person is like this, she can carry out the daily activities, but echo will tell you mainly of the existing diseases. Only if you are highly suspicious of a ischemic heart disease, then only you need to go for further evaluation. During pregnancy, evaluation is not needed unless and until if the patient develops some symptoms. For example, mainly it is the peripartum cardiomyopathy that you come across, and of course, sometimes rarely she has to undergo some emotional, the emotional disturbance, death in the family or something like that. Takotsubo cardiomyopathy may also come into play. So that is according to development of his symptoms. You have to be, monitoring this cardiac function like as needed. Another aspect is regarding DVT. DVT in pregnant women, that also we need to, be highly suspicious. Only a highly suspicious clinician can diagnose it and prevent further deterioration in such case.
Thank you
I
so
think
much.
that is, as per my knowledge.
Sorry for interruption. Please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. No, if anyone else has to contribute to pregnancy period, please.
Yeah, Shafi, what are the points? It's well taken. And also during pregnancy, what we miss is usually the hypertension most of the time. And usually one doctor will take some and staffs will take in a very different way. And when we check, it will be high. So what I advise is any woman with after second trimester or third trimester with a breathing history or a mild pedal edema, is there any changes in BP variation, then they should be closely monitored, because we don't know when they will go for the PAH or the eclampsia, because that is very, very dangerous, because we have to see the fetus and also the mother. So antenatal care will be very, very, very needed. And also depends on our drug, because now the only drug available is the labetalol. So we have to increase with that. And sometimes for edema, we may use Aquacide, but all drugs have their own parameters and everything. So what I suggest is to the gynecologist is, so after this diagnosis of the PAH, ask them to go for a routine screening of the ultrasound to do the fetal Doppler. So fetal Doppler index is also very important, and also any oligohydramnios or whatever. So the early pregnancy or termination after 34, 36 weeks is mandatory. That is what my point of view.
Thank you.
Dr. Shafiq, Wonderful talk. I just want to add the warning signs. Madam was asking regarding the warning signs. Warning signs
Yeah.
is unexplained dyspnea,
Yes.
unexplained tachycardia, and as Dr. Mohan said, hypertension. So these are the warning signs. Well, as a gynecologist, you can always ask for an echo. So I hope your most of the questions are answered by your colleagues. Thank you.
Thank
Also,
you. Thank you so
patient who is on hormonal induced artificial inseminations, we have to be very careful because sometimes we end up with diabetes or hormone induced water loading also. So that has to be also clear.
Thank you so
That's a
much
good point.
For the wonderful presentation by Dr. Shafiq. Before we move on to the next session, I request our chairpersons to kindly felicitate our speaker with a certificate. Of course, this is virtual.
Yeah.
I also request Dr. Mohan, Dr. Vipula Verma,
Yes.
madam, to kindly accept the certificate.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Mohan,
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Dr. Jaishankar.